My name is Daniel Carter, and if someone had asked me 20 years ago what mattered most in life, I wouldn't have said money. I would have said, my little girl, everything I ever built, every overtime shift I worked, every blister on my hands came down to one person, Emily. She was born on a rainy October morning in Cleveland, Ohio, screaming louder than any baby in the maternity ward. The nurse laughed and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You've got yourself a future lawyer." I looked down at that tiny face wrapped in a pink blanket and whispered, "No, I've got my whole world." For the first 6 years of her life, she believed I could fix anything. Broken toys, nightmares, scraped knees, monsters under the bed. I never corrected her, because every father secretly wants his daughter to think he's a superhero. Back then, our house wasn't much. A small blue 2-bedroom on Maple, street with squeaky wooden floors and a porch that leaned just enough to make every visitor nervous. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The air conditioner quit every July. The kitchen cabinets were older than I was. But every Friday night, we made homemade pizza together. Emily sprinkled way too much cheese. I'd pretend to complain. She'd giggle. Then we'd sit on the living room floor watching old family movies until she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. Those nights were richer than anything money could buy. If you're listening to this story on English Parlor, stay with me until the end. Because sometimes the greatest wealth a parent can leave behind isn't found in a bank account. It lives inside the memories that refuse to fade. Things started changing when Emily turned 9. Not because of her, because of her mother. Claire had always wanted more. A bigger house, a nicer neighborhood, luxury vacations, designer clothes. I wanted those things too. I just believed we had to earn them one paycheck at a time. She believed there should be a shortcut. Every conversation became an argument. You work too much. I have to. You'll never become successful. I'm trying. Trying isn't enough. At first, Emily never heard us. Then, she started hearing everything. Kids always do. One night, I found her sitting halfway down the stairs. She thought we hadn't seen her. She hugged her teddy bear while Claire shouted from the kitchen, "I'm tired of pretending this life is enough." Emily looked at me with frightened eyes. "Daddy, are you and Mommy mad?" I forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Adults just talk loudly sometimes." She nodded. She wanted to believe me. Children always want to believe their parents. 6 months later, Claire met someone. His name was Richard Bennett, 46, owner of several luxury hotels across the Midwest, private clubs, sports cars, magazine interviews. He had everything I didn't. The first time I saw him was outside Emily's dance recital. His black Mercedes looked like it belonged in another world. He stepped out wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my pickup truck. Claire smiled at him differently. I noticed. You always notice. He shook my hand. "Daniel, I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure you have." He smiled politely. "I hope we can all be adults here." Adults. Funny word. Adults aren't supposed to steal someone else's family. The divorce happened faster than I expected. Lawyers, paperwork, courtrooms, signatures. Just like that. 14 years of marriage fit inside one cardboard box. The judge awarded shared custody. Emily would spend alternating weeks with each of us. I promised myself we'd make it work. Children deserved both parents, no matter how broken the adults became. Then Richard bought Claire a mansion. Not a house. A mansion. Swimming pool. Movie theater. Tennis court. 3-car garage. Emily called me after her first weekend there. "Daddy? Hey, Peanut. You should see my room. I can't wait. It has its own bathroom." "That's wonderful. And a TV. Really? And a balcony." She wasn't bragging. She was excited. She was still 9 years old. Children don't understand what luxury can do to relationships. They simply enjoy it. That night I walked through my little blue house. The paint was peeling. The water heater rattled. The couch had been repaired twice with duct tape. For the first time, it looked small. Not because it had changed, because I suddenly knew what Emily was comparing it to. Over the next year, little things began disappearing. Daddy, Richard says we should vacation in Europe. That sounds exciting. Daddy, Richard says every successful person owns a boat. Does he? Daddy, Richard says working with your hands ruins your back. I smiled. It sometimes does. She frowned. Then why don't you stop? Because someone has to keep promises. Because someone has to pay bills. Because someone has to build the world everyone else enjoys. Instead, I simply said, because I love what I do. She nodded. But I could tell. She didn't understand anymore. I worked as a custom furniture craftsman. I built dining tables, rocking chairs, bookcases. Everything by hand. One Saturday, Emily visited my workshop. She used to love it there. She'd draw smiley faces in the sawdust. She'd hand me nails while wearing oversized safety goggles. But this visit felt different. She looked around quietly. Daddy? Yeah. Richard says factories can make furniture faster. They can. So, why do people buy yours? I smiled. Because mine carries someone's heart. She looked confused. I ran my hand across an unfinished oak table. This piece will probably stay in one family for 100 years. Kids will eat breakfast here. Grandparents will tell stories here. Someone might even propose across this table someday. Machines can build furniture. Hands build memories. Emily didn't answer. She simply stared. For a second, I thought she understood. Then her phone buzzed. Richard was waiting. She ran out waving goodbye. The silence inside the workshop lasted the rest of the afternoon. Years passed. Emily grew into a beautiful teenager. Smart, funny, kind. But slowly, distance settled between us like dust. She never stopped loving me. She just stopped needing me. Every birthday, Richard gave her something impossible to compete with. A horse, a designer laptop, a new car waiting on her 16th birthday. Me? I carved her a jewelry box from walnut wood. Spent nearly 3 weeks making it perfect. Every corner hand-sanded, every hinge polished. Inside the lid, I carved 6 words. Wherever life takes you, come home. When she opened it, she smiled politely. It's beautiful. Then she looked toward the driveway. Richard's here. She hugged me quickly, grabbed the car keys he'd bought her, and drove away. The jewelry box stayed on my coffee table. Forgotten. I told myself she was just excited. Teenagers always are. Still, when the front door closed, the house felt quieter than ever before. 3 months later, something happened that would change everything forever. It started with a simple invitation. Emily was turning 18. Claire planned a lavish birthday dinner at Richard's estate. Politicians, business owners, local celebrities. I almost didn't go. But Emily asked me herself, Dad, please come. So I did. I even wore the only suit I owned. It was 10 years old. The sleeves were slightly short, but it was clean, pressed. And it reminded me of the man I used to be before life broke me into smaller pieces. I arrived carrying one final handmade gift. A leather-bound journal. Inside the first page, I'd written, no matter where life leads you, you'll always have one person who believes in you before the world does. Love, Dad. I had no idea. Before the night was over, my daughter would make a choice that would haunt us both for the next 20 years. The leather-bound journal felt heavier with every step. I took toward Richard Bennett's mansion. A valet opened my truck door. He looked at my faded Ford for a second longer than necessary before forcing a polite smile. Good evening, sir. I nodded and climbed out, carrying the carefully wrapped gift under my arm. The mansion glowed against the evening sky. Music drifted across perfectly. Trimmed gardens where waiters in white jackets carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, Mercedes, BMWs, Bentleys, even a Rolls-Royce. My old pickup looked like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. I reminded myself I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there for Emily. When I stepped inside, I immediately spotted her. She stood at the center of the ballroom in a beautiful navy blue dress. She had grown into a confident young woman, and for a brief moment, all I could see was the little girl who used to wear mismatched rain boots, because she insisted they made her run faster. Our eyes met. Her face lit up. Dad! She hurried across the room and hugged me. For a second, everything else disappeared. You came. Wouldn't miss it for the world. She smiled. I missed you. Those 3 words healed wounds she didn't even know I carried. I handed her the wrapped journal. This one's from me. She gently touched the package. You still make everything yourself. I always will. Before she could open it, Claire appeared. There you are, she said with a practiced smile. Her eyes briefly scanned my suit. You made it. I told Emily I would. Well, dinner starts in 15 minutes. She turned back toward the guests before I could answer. Some things never changed. Richard was surrounded by business partners. The moment he noticed me, he walked over with a broad smile. Daniel, Richard, I'm glad you came. So am I. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Tonight is important for Emily. I know. I hope we can make this about her. I looked directly into his eyes. It has always been about her. For just a second, his smile faded. Then it returned. Dinner was extravagant. Crystal chandeliers, 5 courses, live violin music, nearly 100 guests. I sat near the end of the table while Richard occupied the seat beside Emily. It wasn't accidental. Everything in that house had been carefully arranged, including where I belonged. During dinner, several guests approached Richard. Your daughter is remarkable. You must be proud. Richard accepted every compliment with a smile. He never corrected them. Not once, Emily noticed. I saw guilt flash across her face, but she stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't worth making a scene. After dessert, Richard tapped a champagne glass. The room became quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for celebrating Emily's 18th birthday. Applause filled the room. He continued. Watching Emily grow into such an intelligent young woman has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. More applause. Then he smiled toward Emily. I have one more surprise. 2 employees wheeled a giant velvet curtain into the ballroom. Richard pulled it away dramatically. Behind it stood a brand new white luxury SUV with a huge silver bow. The crowd gasped. Emily covered her mouth. Oh my God. Richard handed her the keys. Happy birthday. The applause seemed endless. Phones came out. Pictures were taken. Everyone celebrated. I clapped too. Because fathers clap when their daughters smile, even if their hearts are quietly breaking. Finally, Emily turned toward me. Dad, can I open your gift? Of course. The room suddenly grew quieter. She slowly unwrapped the leather journal. Her fingers traced the handmade stitching. She opened the cover. Inside, she read my message. No matter where life leads you, you'll always have one person who believes in you before the world does. Her eyes watered. She smiled. This is beautiful. For one wonderful second, I thought maybe the night would end differently. Then one of Richard's business partners laughed. A notebook? Another guest chuckled. Compared to the SUV? Someone whispered just loudly enough. Poor guy tried. They weren't cruel on purpose. They simply didn't understand. Emily looked around the room. I watched embarrassment slowly replace emotion. She quietly closed the journal. Thank you, Dad. She placed it on the gift table. Then she walked back to admire the SUV. The journal stayed behind. Alone. Exactly how I felt. An hour later, guests gathered in the garden. Emily stood between Claire and Richard while photographers took pictures. I stayed off to the side. The photographer called out, Parents a little closer? Richard wrapped an arm around Emily. Claire smiled. The photographer looked toward me. Oh, sir, could you move just a little farther? You're blocking the fountain. I stepped back. No one corrected him. No one said, That's her father. I wasn't in the picture. In more ways than one. Later that evening, Emily found me standing on the back terrace overlooking the lake. You disappeared. I just needed some air. She leaned against the railing. I'm sorry about earlier. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have opened your gift first. I smiled gently. It doesn't matter. It does. We stood silently for a minute. Then she took a deep breath. Dad, can we talk? Something in her voice frightened me. Of course. She stared at the water instead of me. I've decided. She stopped. What is it? I'm going to live here. I blinked. What do you mean? Full time. I felt the words before I understood them. What about our weekends? I'll be starting college. I know. It'll be easier from here. You can still stay with me. She shook her head. It's too far. It's 40 minutes. I know. Silence. Then she whispered, Dad, this feels more like my life now. Those words hit harder than any punch. I searched her face. Did Richard ask you to do this? No. Did your mother? No. This is your decision? She nodded slowly. I love you. I know. I'll always love you. I know. But she couldn't finish. She didn't have to. I already understood. She wasn't choosing between parents. She was choosing between two worlds. One filled with comfort, the other filled with memories. And memories don't always win. I reached into my pocket. Inside was a small brass key. She recognized it immediately. The workshop? I nodded. You've had this since you were 12. She looked down. I think you should keep it. Her eyes filled with tears. Dad, it's okay. No, it's not. I forced a smile. You'll always have a place there. I know, but maybe not today. She slowly placed the key into my hand. That tiny piece of metal weighed more than my entire toolbox. I left without saying goodbye to anyone else. The drive home felt endless. Every traffic light seemed longer. Every mile quieter. When I opened the front door, the house greeted me with silence. Emily's bedroom was exactly as she'd left it. A softball trophy, old storybooks, a faded stuffed rabbit. I sat on the edge of her bed until sunrise. For the first time since becoming a father, I cried. Not because she loved someone else, but because I feared she'd forgotten how much I loved her. The next morning, I walked into my workshop. My longtime friend and business partner, Mike Reynolds, looked up from a workbench. You look terrible. I feel worse. What happened? My daughter grew up. Mike nodded. That'll do it. I handed him the brass key. She gave it back. He stared at it for several seconds, then quietly placed it on the workbench. Don't throw that away. I'm not. She'll come back for it someday. I laughed bitterly. You sound awfully sure. Mike smiled. I've built furniture with you for 25 years. So, I've watched dozens of families. And? People leave. They do. But eventually, they remember who loved them before they had anything. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But hope was becoming harder to hold. Weeks turned into months. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. Birthdays turned into text messages. Christmas became awkward dinners shared between strangers, pretending everything was normal. Then, one day, Emily stopped calling altogether. I never imagined it would take 20 long years before I heard another knock on my front door. And when that day finally came, she wouldn't be smiling. She would be crying. 20 years. People say time heals everything. They're wrong. Time doesn't heal every wound. Sometimes it simply teaches you how to live with the pain. I was 61 years old when the knock came. By then, Maple Street had changed. The old grocery store where Emily used to beg for chocolate milk had become a coffee shop. The playground where I'd pushed her on the swings had been replaced by a small community garden. Even my little blue house looked different. The porch had been repaired twice. The roof no longer leaked. Fresh white paint covered the faded siding. But one thing had never changed. Emily's bedroom. Every spring I dusted the shelves. Every Christmas I placed a wrapped present on her bed. Every birthday I bought a small bouquet of yellow daisies, her favorite flower when she was little, and left them in a glass vase beside the window. She never came. Still, I couldn't bring myself to stop. My friend Mike used to tease me. One day she's going to walk through that door. I'd smile and answer the same way every year. I hope I'm home when she does. Life had been kind to me in unexpected ways. The furniture business I'd built with my hands had slowly grown into one of Ohio's most respected custom woodworking companies. Young apprentices now filled the workshop. Many of them had never known a father who taught them patience. So I did. I taught them how to choose the right piece of walnut, How to listen to the grain before making the first cut. How rushing ruined good craftsmanship. One of the apprentices, Tyler, often asked me why every dining table had my signature carved underneath. I'd always tell him the same thing. Because someone 50 years from now deserves to know this table was built with love. He'd grin. You sound like a grandfather. I laughed. I wish I were. Every Friday evening after closing the shop, I'd stop at the local diner. Same booth. Same coffee. Same slice of apple pie. The waitresses knew my order before I sat down. It wasn't excitement that kept me returning. It was routine. Routine keeps lonely people moving. One rainy Thursday in October, I closed the workshop early. The weather reminded me of the day Emily had been born. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar SUV parked across the street. It was expensive. Dark blue. New. For just a moment, I wondered if someone was lost. I carried my groceries inside and had barely placed them on the kitchen counter when… knock. 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 3 slow knocks. Not hurried. Not timid. Almost hesitant. I opened the door. A woman stood on the porch. Her dark hair was damp from the rain. She wore a simple gray coat. There were faint lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She looked exhausted, but it wasn't her face that froze me. It was her eyes. The same hazel eyes that had once stared at me from behind. Oversized safety goggles in my workshop. Dad… The grocery bag slipped from my hand. Apples rolled across the porch. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. 20 years disappeared in a single heartbeat. Then she whispered again. I'm sorry. Before I could answer, she broke into tears. Real tears, not polite tears. Not embarrassed tears, the kind that come from carrying pain for far too long. Without thinking, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. For a few seconds, she was 9 years old again. My little girl. She clung to me as though she were afraid I'd disappear. I'm so sorry, she kept repeating. I'm so sorry. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask where she'd been. I simply said the words I'd waited 20 years to say. Come home. She stepped inside slowly. Her eyes wandered across the living room. You kept everything. The couch is new. She laughed softly through her tears. You always hated that old couch. It finally lost the fight. She smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in decades. Then she noticed the hallway. Her bedroom door was still painted pale yellow, exactly the way she'd left it. You never changed it? I couldn't. She placed a trembling hand on the doorknob and slowly pushed the door open. The room looked almost untouched. Her bookshelf, the softball trophy, the stuffed rabbit with one floppy ear, the walnut jewelry box I'd made for her 18th birthday. She walked to the nightstand. The jewelry box was still there. Carefully, she opened it. Inside lay the brass workshop key, the very key she'd handed back to me 20 years earlier. Her hands began shaking. You kept it. I hoped you'd ask for it someday. She couldn't hold back any more. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. I didn't deserve this. No, I said quietly. You deserved even more. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she'd once spilled orange juice while trying to do 3rd grade homework. I made grilled cheese sandwiches. She laughed. You still burn one side. I call it flavor. It's still burnt. Some things never change. For the first time in years, the house sounded alive. But behind every smile, I could see something was terribly wrong. She looked thinner than she should have. The confidence she once carried was gone. There was fear in her eyes. Finally, I asked gently, Emily, what happened? She stared into her coffee. For nearly a minute, she said nothing. Then she reached into her purse and removed an old leather journal. I recognized it instantly. The birthday gift she'd barely looked at 20 years earlier. She placed it on the table between us. I've carried this with me almost every day. I looked at her in surprise. I thought you left it behind. I did. For one night. She looked down. The next morning, I went back and took it. My heart tightened. I've read your message hundreds of times. Her voice cracked. When life became unbearable, Those words were the only thing that reminded me someone believed in me. She took a deep breath. Dad, I need to tell you something. I nodded. You can tell me anything. She closed her eyes. Richard isn't the man I thought he was. The room fell silent. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, I realized that the daughter who had returned to me wasn't just carrying regret. She was carrying a secret that was about to change everything. I believed about the last 20 years. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping softly against the kitchen windows. Emily stared at the steaming cup of coffee in front of her, turning it slowly with trembling hands. Finally, she whispered, Dad, I owe you the truth. I leaned back in my chair. There isn't anything you can tell me that will make me stop loving you. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. That's exactly why this is so hard. She took a deep breath. The night I turned 18, after you left the party, she stopped. I wanted to run after you. I looked at her, surprised. I really did. So why didn't you? Because Richard stopped me. Those words hung in the air. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, If you leave now, you'll embarrass your mother in front of everyone. Emily wiped away a tear. I believed him. He told me adulthood meant making practical choices, not emotional ones. She looked at me. I thought choosing his world would give me opportunities. Her voice cracked. I didn't realize I was giving up the person who loved me unconditionally. The first few years seemed wonderful. Richard paid for the best university. Emily graduated with honors. She traveled across Europe. She attended charity galas and business conferences. On social media, her life looked perfect. But appearances can be the greatest lie. Richard had one rule, she said quietly. Everything he gave me had a price. What do you mean? He expected loyalty. She swallowed hard. Not love. Loyalty. If I disagreed with him, he reminded me who paid my tuition. If I questioned him, he reminded me who bought my apartment. If I wanted independence, he'd say I owed him everything. I felt anger rising inside me. Not because he had money, because he used it like chains, Emily continued. When I was 26, I fell in love. Her face softened for the first time that evening. His name was Nathan. He was a high school history teacher. He made me laugh. He loved old bookstores. He drove a 15-year-old pickup truck. I smiled. He sounds like someone I'd have liked. She laughed through her tears. You would have. So what happened? Richard happened. When Richard learned Nathan wasn't wealthy, he exploded. He called him ordinary. He said teachers never become successful. He offered Nathan a job in one of his companies. Nathan politely refused. He said he already had his dream job. Richard never forgave him. Within months, Emily found herself trapped between the man who had raised her after the divorce and the man she wanted to build a future with. I chose Nathan. I smiled. I'm proud of you. But it cost us everything. Richard cut her off financially. No apartment. No trust fund. No luxury lifestyle. Nothing. He told me if I walked away, I would never be welcome in his home again. So I walked. She smiled sadly. For the first time in years, I finally understood what you had sacrificed to give me a simple life. Nathan and Emily rented a tiny apartment. Money was tight. Very tight. Nathan graded papers at night. Emily worked 2 jobs. Sometimes they ate pasta 3 nights in a row. But, she smiled warmly, we were happy. I couldn't help smiling too. Real happiness has never cared much about bank accounts. 2 years later, their son was born. You have a son? She nodded. 12 years old? My heart nearly stopped. I have a grandson? She smiled through tears. His name is... She paused. Daniel. I couldn't speak. You named him after me? He deserved to know the kind of man his grandfather was, even if he'd never met you. I lowered my head. 20 years of loneliness. And somewhere out there, a little boy had been carrying my name. Why didn't you tell me? Emily broke down again. I wanted to. So many times. But every year that passed, it became harder. I was ashamed. I kept thinking you'd hate me. I reached across the table and took her hand. Emily. She looked up. I lost 20 years. I'm not going to lose another minute because of pride. She cried even harder. I'm so sorry, Dad. I know, and I forgive you. The next hour was filled with photographs. Emily opened her phone. Thousands of pictures. A little boy learning to ride a bicycle. School concerts. Fishing trips. Birthday cakes. Christmas mornings. Each picture felt like another chapter of a book I'd never been allowed to read. Then I noticed something. In almost every picture, Nathan was smiling. But in the last few months, he was gone. I looked up. Emily, where's Nathan? The room became painfully quiet. She stared at the table. He died. The words barely escaped her lips. Last year, my heart sank. What happened? A drunk driver. She closed her eyes. It happened on his way home from school. He never made it. Silence filled the kitchen. No parent should bury a child. No wife should lose her husband. No little boy should lose his father. Emily continued quietly. After Nathan died, I lost everything. The bills piled up. The mortgage fell behind. I tried working longer hours, but I couldn't keep up. So, I went back to Richard. I already knew how that story ended. He refused. She nodded. He said, "You made your choice years ago." The words sounded painfully familiar. Except, I had never said them. Not once. She looked at me with exhausted eyes. I drove away from his mansion, and the only address I could remember by heart was this one. She glanced around the old kitchen. I almost turned around 3 times. I didn't think you'd open the door. I smiled gently. I've been waiting at that door for 20 years. Emily reached into her purse one last time. She pulled out a folded envelope. Dad, I found this among Richard's old business papers. It has your name on it. I frowned. My name? She slid it across the table. The envelope was sealed. Yellow with age. Postmarked. 19 years earlier. I stared at it in disbelief. I never received this. I know. Richard kept it. My hands trembled as I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter that would reveal the shocking reason my daughter disappeared from my life and prove that the last 20 years had been built on one enormous lie. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to unfold the letter. The envelope was worn and yellowed with age. My name, Daniel Carter, was written across the front in now, Emily's familiar handwriting. I traced the letters with my fingertips. 19 years, I whispered. Emily lowered her eyes. I'm so sorry. I carefully unfolded the paper. The first line blurred through my tears before I even finished reading it. Dear Dad, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to tell you the truth. I stopped. My hands were shaking. Emily quietly slid a tissue across the table. I smiled weakly. I guess fathers cry more as they get older. She managed a small smile. No. I think fathers just stop hiding it. I continued reading. I miss you every single day. Richard says it's better if we don't see each other for a while because it only makes moving forward harder. My chest tightened. Richard. The letter continued. I don't know if he's right. I only know I feel guilty every time I drive past Maple Street. Sometimes I park around the corner just hoping to see you working in the garage. Emily covered her face. I really did. You came. So many times. Why didn't you knock? She broke down crying. I was afraid you'd slam the door. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. I could never do that. I looked back at the letter. I still carry the little wooden bird you carved for me when I was 8. I laughed softly. You kept that? Emily nodded. It's in my purse. She reached inside and carefully pulled out a tiny wooden robin. The paint had faded. One wing was chipped, but it was unmistakably the little bird I'd carved while teaching her how to sand wood. I carried it everywhere. I couldn't speak. For 20 years, she had carried a piece of home. The letter continued. I'm scared I'm becoming someone you wouldn't recognize. Everyone around me talks about money, success, and appearances. You taught me that kindness matters more. I'm trying not to forget that. I folded the letter for a moment. Emily, you never forgot. She looked confused. What do you mean? Kind people still apologize. Kind people still cry when they've hurt someone. Kind people come home. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. There was only one page left. My heart pounded as I read the final paragraph. Dad, if you still love me, please write back. I'll come wherever you ask me to. Below it was an address, not Richard's mansion, a small apartment across town. The letter had been written only 6 months after she'd moved out. I stared at the postmark again. It had never been delivered. Richard had intercepted it. For nearly 2 decades, he had allowed both of us to believe the other no longer cared. I folded the letter carefully. I would have answered. Emily nodded. I know. I would have come. I know. We sat in silence. Sometimes the greatest theft isn't money. It's time. And Richard Bennett had stolen 20 years from both of us. The next morning, I unlocked the workshop. The familiar smell of oak and cedar filled the air. Mike looked up from his workbench. You've got company. Emily stepped inside. Her eyes wandered around the room. It hasn't changed. Neither have you, Mike said with a grin. She laughed. I've gotten older. So have we. Mike walked over and hugged her tightly. I always told this stubborn old man you'd come back. Emily looked at me. He never gave up? Mike laughed. Every birthday. Every Christmas. He bought you a present. Emily stared at me. You did. I shrugged. A father keeps shopping. Hope doesn't have a return policy. She burst into tears again. Mike quietly disappeared into the office. Emily walked slowly around the workshop. Her fingers brushed across finished dining tables, rocking chairs, bookshelves. Then she noticed something hanging on the far wall. A large framed photograph. It showed a little girl wearing oversized safety goggles, holding a hammer twice the size of her hand. Me kneeling beside her. She smiled. You kept this? It's my favorite picture. She looked closer. Under the frame was a small brass plaque. It read, The reason I never quit. Emily covered her mouth. Dad, I built every piece of furniture, hoping one day you'd see what hard work could become. Just then the front door opened. A young boy ran inside. Grandpa Dan. I turned. Tyler's 7-year-old son raced toward me. I picked him up, laughing. Emily watched quietly. Who's this handsome guy? This is Noah, my unofficial grandson. The little boy smiled at Emily. Hi. She knelt beside him. Hi. You know Grandpa? She smiled sadly. I've known him his whole life. Noah thought for a second. Then you're lucky. Emily's eyes filled again. Yes, I was. That afternoon, as we closed the workshop, Emily's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her face turned pale. Who is it? I asked. She swallowed hard. Richard. She let it ring. Then it stopped. A second later, another call. Then another. Then another. Finally, a voicemail notification appeared. She looked at me nervously. I don't want to hear it. You don't have to. But after a long pause, she pressed play. Richard's voice filled the workshop. Emily, you've made your point. Now stop acting like a child and come home. Emily's expression hardened. There is no home, she whispered. The voicemail continued. And tell Daniel not to get any ideas. I'll be there tomorrow. The message ended. Silence filled the workshop. Mike slowly set down his hammer. He knows where you are. I nodded. Apparently. Emily looked terrified. I'm sorry. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You have nothing to apologize for. She looked into my eyes. But he'll come. I smiled calmly. So will I. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't afraid of facing Richard Bennett. Because this time, I wasn't fighting to win my daughter back. She had already come home. That night, neither of us slept much. Emily stayed in her old bedroom. I stayed awake in the living room, staring at the rain sliding down the windows. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was anticipation. For 20 years, Richard Bennett had been a shadow hanging over our lives. Tomorrow, that shadow was coming to my front door. The next morning, I woke early and made pancakes. Emily walked into the kitchen wearing one of my old flannel shirts. For a second, she looked exactly like the teenager who used to raid my refrigerator after school. She smiled. You still make too much breakfast. You still skip breakfast. Some habits never change. For the first time since she'd returned, she seemed relaxed. Then she glanced out the window. A black luxury sedan was pulling into the driveway. Her smile vanished. He's here. I placed a hand over hers. You don't have to talk to him. Yes, I do. The car stopped. The driver's door opened. Richard Bennett stepped out. 20 years had changed him. His hair was mostly gray. His posture wasn't quite as confident. The expensive suit remained. The expensive watch remained. The expensive car remained. But something else had disappeared. Power. I could see it in his eyes. The kind of power people have when everyone around them obeys. That power was gone. A moment later, there was a knock. 3 sharp knocks. Confident. Demanding. The same way he'd always entered a room. Emily looked terrified. I stood. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Then I opened the door. Richard stared at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he nodded. Daniel? Richard. His eyes immediately searched past me. Emily. She stepped into view. His expression softened. Or at least he tried to make it look that way. There you are. Emily remained silent. Do you have any idea how worried I've been? Still silence. Richard sighed dramatically. Enough of this. He looked at her. Come home. Emily surprised both of us. She stood straighter. No. The word landed like a hammer. Richard blinked. No? No. His jaw tightened. Emily, you're upset. I'm not upset. Then stop behaving irrationally. My hands curled into fists. Emily looked directly at him. I've spent 20 years listening to you explain my feelings to me. I'm done. Richard's eyes narrowed. Daniel has been filling your head with stories. That did it. I stepped forward. No. Richard turned toward me. Stay out of this. I laughed. You stole 20 years from my family. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. For the first time, Richard looked uncomfortable. Not angry. Uncomfortable. Because the rules had changed. He couldn't buy his way through this conversation. Emily reached into her coat pocket. Then she pulled out the letter. The letter. The one he'd hidden. His face instantly changed. Color drained from it. Where did you get that? You know exactly where. Richard didn't answer. She unfolded the paper. You kept this from him. Silence. You let him think I didn't care. Silence. You let me think he didn't want me. Still silence. Finally, Richard spoke. I did what I thought was best. Emily laughed bitterly. For who? Richard's voice rose. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The pressure? Everything I built was at risk. I stared at him. What does that have to do with a letter? He looked away. And that's when I realized something. He wasn't here because he loved Emily. He was here because he was losing control. Then he said something neither of us expected. My company is collapsing. The room went silent. Emily blinked. What? Richard lowered his head. The hotels. The investments. The partnerships. They're gone. For a moment, nobody spoke. The mighty Richard Bennett. The millionaire who seemed untouchable. The man who had spent decades convincing everyone that wealth solved every problem. Was broke. He sat heavily in a kitchen chair, looking suddenly much older than 70. 3 years ago, things started going wrong. Lawsuits. Bad investments. Debt. I thought I could recover. He laughed bitterly. I was wrong. Emily stared at him. So that's why you're here? No. Then why? His eyes filled with tears. Real tears. The first I'd ever seen. Because everyone left. Silence. The board left. My friends left. The investors left. He swallowed hard. Even Claire left. Emily looked stunned. Mom left? He nodded. 6 months ago. The room felt strangely quiet. I remembered the man I'd hated for 20 years. The man who always seemed larger than life. Now he looked like a lonely old man sitting in a kitchen that wasn't his. Richard looked at Emily. When your mother left, I realized something. She waited. I spent my whole life collecting things. Houses, cars, businesses, money. His voice cracked. And somehow I ended up alone. Emily folded her arms. You should have realized that before destroying other people's relationships. He closed his eyes. I know. For the first time since arriving, Richard looked at me. Not as a rival. Not as someone beneath him. Just another old man. Daniel. I didn't answer. He swallowed. I owe you an apology. 20 years. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. Thought it would feel satisfying. Victorious? Instead, it just felt sad. I was jealous of you. I blinked. What? Richard nodded. You had something I couldn't buy. Neither of us spoke. He looked toward Emily. She loved you. And no matter what I gave her, I knew she always would. Emily's eyes widened. Richard laughed sadly. So I convinced myself I could replace you. His shoulders slumped. I couldn't. The silence that followed seemed endless. Then Emily quietly asked, Did you ever love me? The question broke something inside him. His eyes filled instantly. Yes. No hesitation. No performance. Just pain. More than anything. Emily started crying. Because life is rarely simple. Villains don't always believe they're villains. Sometimes they are broken people making terrible choices. Richard stood slowly. I don't expect forgiveness. He looked at me. Either of you. Then he reached into his coat and placed a small envelope on the table. For Emily, what is it? She asked. A letter. He smiled sadly. I think letters deserve to be delivered this time. Without another word, Richard walked toward the door. For a second, I thought he'd leave forever. Then he stopped, turned around, and looked at me. She came back. I nodded. Yes. A faint smile appeared on his face. I always knew she would. Then he left. The black sedan disappeared down Maple Street. Emily stood motionless by the window, watching until it vanished. Then she opened the envelope he'd left behind. Inside was a handwritten note. Only one sentence. She read it aloud through tears. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't something you own. Neither of us spoke, but deep down, we both knew this story wasn't over yet, because the next chapter wouldn't be about Richard. It would be about someone I'd never met, my grandson. And in just a few days, a 12-year-old boy named Daniel would walk through my front door and change everything. For the first time in more than 20 years, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Excitement. Not the kind that comes from success or money. The kind that keeps you awake because tomorrow might give you back a piece of your heart. Emily had promised that her son would arrive on Saturday morning. His name was Daniel. Named after me. I must have looked at the clock 100 times before sunrise. You're nervous. Emily laughed as she found me polishing the kitchen table for the 3rd time. I am not. You've rearranged those chairs 4 times. They weren't straight. She smiled. They were. I shrugged. I just want everything to be perfect. She walked over and hugged me. Dad? He doesn't need a perfect house. He just needs his grandfather. Those words stayed with me. Sometimes we spend years worrying about what we don't have, forgetting that love has never needed expensive furniture or fancy walls. Around 10 o'clock, a small silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Emily stood so quickly that her coffee nearly spilled. He's here. Before I reached the door, it flew open. A skinny 12-year-old boy stepped onto the porch carrying an old backpack. He had messy brown hair, curious hazel eyes, and the same shy smile I used to see in Emily. For a moment, we simply looked at one another. Then he spoke. Hi. His voice cracked with nervousness. Are you... Grandpa? I couldn't answer immediately. 20 years of waiting, and suddenly there he was. I finally managed to smile. I've been waiting a long time to hear someone call me that. The boy smiled back. Then, without another word, he wrapped his arms around me. I hugged him as tightly as I could. Behind him, Emily quietly wiped tears from her eyes. The first hour felt wonderfully awkward. Daniel explored every room as if he were discovering a museum. So this is Mom's room? It still is. You never changed it? No. He looked around in amazement. My mom said you kept everything. I kept hope. He didn't fully understand, but someday he would. Later, I took him to the workshop. The moment he walked inside, his eyes grew wide. Whoa! Rows of handcrafted tables, rocking chairs, bookshelves, and cabinets stretched across the building. The smell of fresh-cut oak filled the air. This is amazing! I handed him a pair of child-sized safety goggles. They used to belong to your mom. He laughed. They're tiny. So was she. He put them on anyway. For just a second, it felt like time had folded in on itself. Mike walked over carrying a block of walnut. So this must be Daniel. The boy nodded politely. Nice to meet you, sir. Mike looked at me. He even has your manners. I laughed. Let's hope he has better woodworking skills. Daniel grinned. We'll see. I placed a smooth piece of maple on the workbench. First lesson. What are we making? A bird? He looked confused. A bird? Your mom's first project was a bird. Emily smiled from across the room. It looked more like a potato with wings. Everyone laughed. For the first time in years, the workshop sounded like family. Hours passed without anyone noticing. I taught Daniel how to sand wood with the grain. How patience mattered more than strength. How mistakes could usually be fixed if you admitted them early enough. He listened carefully, more carefully than most adults. Finally, he asked, Grandpa? Yes? Why do you build everything by hand? I smiled. Because people remember things made with love. He thought about that, then quietly said, My dad used to say something like that. Emily lowered her eyes. The room grew silent. That evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emily and I sat on the porch. The summer breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass. I saw Nathan in him today, I said. She smiled. So do I. I wish I'd met him. He would have loved you. She looked toward the stars. He used to tell Daniel stories about a grandfather who could fix anything. I laughed softly. I can't fix everything. No. She squeezed my hand. But you've always fixed people. The next morning, Daniel wandered into the garage before anyone else was awake. He found an old wooden chest tucked into the corner. Grandpa? I walked over. What did you find? Can I open it? I hesitated for a second, then nodded. Inside were neatly wrapped birthday presents. Dozens of them, each labeled in my handwriting. Emily, age 9. Emily, age 20. Emily, age 21. All the way to Emily, age 38. Daniel stared in disbelief. You bought these every year? I nodded quietly. I never knew if she'd come home. Emily had walked in behind us. She saw the open chest and froze. Slowly, she picked up one of the packages. Dad, her voice broke. You never stopped. I couldn't. She collapsed into my arms, crying harder than I had ever seen. I'm so sorry. I held her tightly. We can't change yesterday, but we still have tomorrow. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A moving truck stopped outside the house. Emily looked confused. I didn't order anything. Neither had I. A driver climbed out carrying a clipboard. Delivery for Daniel Carter. That's me? He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter from Richard Bennett. It read, Daniel, I've sold my final property. Inside the truck are the woodworking tools your father once sold me 40 years ago. When your family fell on hard times, I learned only recently that they had belonged to your grandfather. They should never have left your family. Please accept them. Not as payment, because nothing can repay what I took, but as one old man trying to do one decent thing before it's too late. I looked toward the truck. Inside sat dozens of beautifully restored antique woodworking tools. Hand planes, chisels, carving knives, each one carefully polished. I recognized them instantly. They had belonged to my grandfather. I had believed they were lost forever. Tears filled my eyes. Emily whispered. He really did change. I nodded slowly. Maybe. That evening, Daniel helped me unpack every tool. He held up an old hand plane. Grandpa? Yes? One day, will these be mine? I smiled. No. He looked disappointed. They'll be ours. He grinned from ear to ear. At that moment, I realized something. Richard had stolen 20 years, but he hadn't stolen forever. Because families don't become whole in a single day. They become whole one conversation, one hug, one act of forgiveness at a time. And although none of us knew it yet, the greatest surprise of all was waiting just around the corner. The workshop had never felt so alive. For weeks, Daniel came every afternoon after school. He would rush through the front door with his backpack still hanging from one shoulder. "Grandpa!" I smiled every single time. Some words are worth waiting 20 years to hear. One Saturday morning, I unlocked the workshop before sunrise. Daniel was already waiting outside. "You're early." He grinned. I couldn't sleep. Why? Today's the day. It was. For nearly 3 months, we'd been building something together. Not for a customer, not for a competition, for our family. Hidden beneath a large canvas in the middle of the workshop stood a 12-seat oak dining table. Every member of our family had left a mark on it. Emily had carved a tiny daisy underneath one corner. Daniel had engraved his initials beside mine. I had carved 6 familiar words into the underside of the tabletop. "Wherever life takes you, come home." The same words I had once written inside the jewelry box. Emily almost left behind forever. Mike walked in carrying coffee. "I've seen thousands of tables." He smiled. "But this one's special." Daniel looked confused. "Why?" Mike laughed. "Because this one wasn't built with wood. It was built with forgiveness." That afternoon, Emily arrived carrying a casserole dish. "I made your favorite. I hope it's better than the one you made when you were 16. She laughed. "It definitely is." The house filled with laughter. Neighbors stopped by. Tyler and his family came. The apprentices from the workshop brought desserts. For the first time in decades, the Carter house was full. Not because it was large, because it was loved. As everyone gathered around the table, Daniel stood up nervously. He looked at Emily. Then at me. "I made something." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "It's for Grandpa." He unfolded it carefully. "I wrote it at school." The room became quiet. He began reading. "My name is Daniel Carter. I used to think families were people who always stayed together. Now I know families are people who keep loving each other, even after they get lost. My grandpa waited 20 years for my mom to come home. He never got angry. He never gave up. He just kept the light on. When I grow up, I want to be the kind of man who leaves the light on for people he loves." By the time he finished, no one had dry eyes. I walked over and hugged him. "You already are." A week later, there was another knock at the front door. Emily looked through the window. "It's Richard." Silence filled the room. I opened the door. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. There was no expensive suit, no luxury watch, just an old jacket and tired eyes. "I won't stay long." He held out a small wooden box. "I found this while cleaning my office." Inside was a faded photograph. It showed Emily at 9 years old. She was standing in my workshop wearing oversized safety goggles. On the back of the picture, Richard had written years earlier, "She smiles differently when she's with her father." Emily looked at him in surprise. "You kept this?" He nodded. "I kept more memories than I deserved." He looked at me. "I don't expect to be part of your family." Then he looked at Daniel. "I only wanted to say goodbye." Daniel stepped forward. "Mom says Grandpa taught her that forgiveness makes people stronger." Richard nodded sadly. He was right. Before anyone could speak again, Daniel did something none of us expected. He walked over and hugged Richard. The old man's shoulders began to shake. For the first time, he cried without trying to hide it. Over the following months, Richard never tried to interfere. Sometimes he would visit the workshop for coffee. Sometimes he'd simply sit quietly on the porch. There were no grand speeches, no attempts to erase the past, only small acts of kindness. Sometimes that's the most honest apology. Spring arrived. The community announced its annual charity auction. Daniel had an idea. "Grandpa, what if we donate our family table?" I smiled. "It's too special." He nodded. "I know. That's why another family should build memories around it." I looked at Emily. She smiled. "Dad, you taught us that love grows when it's shared." She was right. Together, we donated the table. At the auction, a young couple with 3 little children bought it. Before they carried it away, I quietly looked underneath one final time. The carving was still there. "Wherever life takes you, come home." I smiled. Another family would read those words someday. Another family would make memories around that table. That was enough. A year later, our workshop had a new sign above the entrance. Carter and grandson, custom furniture. Daniel insisted my name come first. I insisted his come second. We compromised. Both names were carved in the same size. Because families aren't measured by age. They're measured by love. One quiet evening, Emily and I sat on the porch watching Daniel sand a small wooden bird. Exactly like the one she'd made as a little girl. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm home." I smiled. "I know. I'm never leaving again." You don't have to. If you're listening on English Parlor, remember this. Life may give you success. It may give you wealth. It may even give you everything you once dreamed of. But none of those things can replace the people who love you when you have nothing. Never let pride steal years that love could still save. If someone is worth forgiving, don't wait 20 years. Pick up the phone. Knock on the door. Leave the light on. Because sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't that someone comes home. It's that someone was still waiting when they did.